trials and tribulations, they stood tall and brave. A prophetic vision, the path that they paved, in the sacred grove where the heavens met earth. A faith was ignited, a reawakening of worth. Through pages of history, the stories unfold, of love and of struggle, of courage so bold. Oh, Doctrine and Covenants, words written in grace, revealing a journey leading us to a sacred place. With every verse sung, we feel the peace descend. In the whispers of the past, our spirits mend.
Welcome to Doctrine and Covenants, section 46 bonus session. And with that, we are just excited to be able to have a special guest with us today. We invited our special guest and friend, Craig Foster, to come because of his vast knowledge of digging into church history and many of the things in the Doctrine and Covenants, particularly church history. And with that, I'm going to have Rhonda give a little bio of Craig so you know who he is.
Alrighty. Craig Foster has authored or co-authored 7 books. He co-edited The Persistence of Polygamy, Joseph Smith and the Origins of Mormon Polygamy, published by John Whitmer Books in 2010. And it's part of a 3-volume series. He also co-authored American Polygamy, A History of Fundamentalist Mormon Faith, published by the History Press in 2019. And he's authored articles and given a number of presentations discussing the history of plural marriage. So it's an honor to have Craig with us on our broadcast today. And then also he has served as a counselor in the bishopric and on the High Council, but is currently the Stake Temple and Family History Consultant for the Holmes Creek Stake in Layton. And I have known him as working for what I know of as Family Search for over 30 years. Yes. And still volunteers and works there as well. So thank you for joining us today. And I'm so excited to hear the history that you're about to share with us.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you all know that you can always find us on propheticappointments.com. And today I'm going to introduce myself as Farrell.
And I'm Rhonda Pickering.
And go ahead.
And I'm Craig Foster.
There you go.
And with that, we're just going to turn it over to you, and then we will jump in if we feel like we have some enlightened question or whatever. But other than that, just take it away.
Okay. Well, we're discussing section 132, and the thing that we need to keep in mind is that while 132 was recorded on the 12th of July, 1843, it was a long time coming, I guess you could say. There's evidence that Joseph Smith was aware as early as 1830, certainly by 1831, that as a part of the restoration of all things, plural marriage would need to be restored and would need to be lived. And so it was, you could say that the introduction of plural marriage was fitful and kind of messy at times. And but Joseph Smith certainly knew that this was from God, and even so, he was hesitant to practice plural marriage because the concept of plurality of wives was so foreign to him and to other people of his time that he really kind of fought against it. Well, not really fought against it, but he really
resisted.
He dragged his heels quite a bit because it was so uncomfortable. So with that in mind, what I want to do is to kind of give a little bit of a couple of quotes about plural marriage. So Joseph told associates that an angel appeared to him 3 times between 1834 and 1842 and commanded him to proceed with living plural marriage. he, once again, he hesitated. Finally, during the third and final appearance, an angel came to him with a drawn sword and basically told him that he would be destroyed, that he would be removed out of the way and someone else would be raised up, because there had to be a restoration of all things. And so he began living plural marriage. Now, let me back up one step. Early on, he had attempted to live plural marriage. And so his first plural wife was Fanny Alger. And
I'll just
yes,
jump in before you jump forward from there. I would like you to give a little history of where we get the accounts of the angel coming.
okay. The accounts actually come from several different sources. They're both men and women. And one of the women who gave the account was Mary Elizabeth Rollins Lightner. And she eventually became one of Joseph Smith's plural wives. She was sealed to him. She was already married to Adam Lightner, who was not a member of the church and never did join the church, but he was friendly toward the church. But so she was sealed for eternity, but certainly not for time. Yeah, she was not a wife in the traditional way. She was only sealed to Adam.
So, Craig, if I can, I correct me if I'm wrong on this, but as far as I understand, we say that the angel came at 3 times, and that's because Joseph Smith basically had the first experience that you're going to talk about with Fanny or Frances Alger, but that kind of ended up in a bit of a crisis and a disaster, and I'm sure you'll talk about that. But then he was told after that situation that he still had to introduce it, and so from what I understand, the reason that he was sealed to these other men's wives in the beginning was just to try and do it without threatening Emma, like the first situation had been such a crisis situation. And then it was only when he wasn't really to go full in to actual having 2 wives at the same time, that's when the angel with the drawn sword came.
Right, right.
So is that right? That perception?
That's what I understand, is that he married Fanny Alger while still in Kirtland. And it just ended up being a very difficult situation.
It would have been around 1835, about the
Yes.
same time the Book of Commandments was being
Yes.
published. And then part of that crisis was that when others got gossip, a rumor about it, they took their own interpretation on it and started calling him a fallen prophet. Right?
It was 35 to 36, and it's what Oliver Cowdery referred to. We have the quote as the dirty, nasty little affair, but he originally actually called it a scrape, meaning an uncomfortable or unpleasant experience or
And
event.
that's actually in the record, right?
And it
Scratched out.
yes, it is. What it was erased, but you can see that the word scrape had been erased, and he wrote over it. He wrote affair. The reason why is because he was an educated man. He was, had a law background and everything. And scrape was more a colloquialism. He wanted it to sound a little bit better. And affair did not mean what it means
Exactly.
to us nowadays. And so you've got to always keep in mind that their way of talking or writing, among many other things, it was different than what it is now. And so what he certainly did not mean what most people nowadays envision. So he had an extramarital affair. No, he did not. And
It's the other definition of the word. Like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, but an affair.
basically,
Yeah, yeah.
it was something that happened or an event, and that's what he had meant, rather than like an extramarital
Right.
affair. And actually, that's written about by Don Bradley in our volume, The Persistence of Polygamy.
So I mentioned those. Did you have a copy of that with you today?
I do have a
You-
copy.
You give us a take a look at this. This is
There we go.
Persistence, and tell us about the book. It's got essays in it.
It is a compilation of essays by various authors, including a couple of essays by myself and by the co-editor, Noel Bringhurst. And
it kind of progresses then from the introduction of polygamy back
yes, so
in
the
early
first
days.
volume deals with plural marriage during the time of Joseph Smith. And in fact, the title is Joseph Smith and the Origins of Mormon Polygamy. And then the second volume deals with plural marriage from 1844 to 1890. So from the martyrdom to the first manifesto.
And I'm hoping everybody is excited about this. I'm super excited. We're actually going to have Craig come back for that lesson as well, because he's an expert in that area as well, the persecution and the oppression that was coming on to bear on the church at that time. So we'll do that when we do the manifesto. So that book would
Yes.
kind of go in that area.
Yes. And then the third volume is from 1890 to what was the present at that time, 2015, when the third volume came out.
Right. And then you have you authored one more.
And
after
then
that.
after that, I co-authored a book, Mormon Polygamy, A History of Fundamentalist Mormon Faith.
So, but again, we're just so excited to have you here. Continue with Fanny Alger. We're 1835, and just while I'm talking, let me give you one more quick question. I want you to kind of tell us a little bit the history of when you think it was when Joseph first learned about it. When do you think he very first learned about
So I
celestial polygamy?
personally think that he probably, I think that it was, there could have been a couple of ways. One was that just in his reading that he was doing, but certainly by the time that he was doing the Joseph Smith translation of the Old Testament, with having the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc., I am sure that if he had not asked questions before, he certainly did by that point, because here were men of God who had plural wives.
And we can kind of pinpoint that time because we know that when Joseph Smith received the revelation to stop translating the Old Testament and to go to the New Testament, he was on Genesis 24. And that's the beginning of the stories of Isaac. So he had just finished all of the stories of Abraham and the Abrahamic covenant. And so again, that's possible that, that he did it that time, or even from some of the stuff he read in the Book of Mormon.
Yes, exactly. And I can well imagine that here he was doing the translation, and he came upon Abraham, who obviously was chosen of God, who covenanted with God. And so here is a righteous man living plural marriage, and I'm sure Joseph Smith was wondering, how can that be? What are the circumstances there where it's not a sin and it's okay with God? And he probably regretted asking that question. Well, in fact, I even want to I'm going to jump to Doctrine and Covenants just really quickly, because in verse 3 of section 132, it says, "Therefore prepare thy heart to receive and obey the instructions," and it goes on about what you learn you will need to live. And of course, it makes reference that Joseph had asked about that, and so obviously this is something that was on Joseph's mind, and he felt inspired to ask about it. And I personally think that he was inspired to ask about it because there had to be a restoration of all things. There's a historian who commented that basically, of course, Joseph Smith had to restore plural marriage because it was a restoration of all things. So it was inevitable that eventually plural marriage would be restored.
I actually think that we've kind of speculated on when he might have asked the questions, but we start to see documents coming in that are kind of secondhand in 1831. So make sure to tell us about that one as well.
Yes. So there are references. For example, when the missionaries went on the mission down to Missouri, to the western border of Missouri, to basically going to speak to the Lamanites and to teach them, Joseph Smith had made reference to the fact that at some point that perhaps some of the brethren, some of the elders of the church would be marrying Native Americans, would be marrying Lamanites. Well, the men who went on the mission were married. So how was that going to happen? And Joseph had only made reference to that and did not go any further at that point. But here and there were hints kind of suggesting that eventually there would be a plurality of wives.
And I think at first he was not supposed to reveal it to everybody. It was supposed to be wait for the right time.
Exactly.
And I think that is what he said in Nauvoo, that now was the time.
Right. And that was part of the problem in Kirtland, was that it was supposed to be very quiet at the time. And I've had people comment, well, when is a prophet, said, well, let's keep this secret, or held secrets like that. And my first thought is, well, let's look to the Savior himself. When he raised the daughter of Jairus, he told Peter, James, and John, keep this to yourselves until a future time. When he was on the Mount of Transfiguration, he once again said, don't tell anyone what happened here until a future time.
Well, and we have in the case of the Matthew 24 and some of those things, we have where he actually was asked the question, why do you speak so plainly to us, and yet you talk in parables to everyone else? And I think that's kind of a common thing that the masses, well, particularly, we know the church is governed by common consent, and that it is a requirement for it to become a tenet of the church to have common consent. And so at that point in time, a lot of things can be revealed before they become binding on a people, because in a sense, it's like when Moses came down with the law, they had to agree with it to be under covenant. Covenant
Yes.
means a two-way agreement.
Exactly.
So in that regard, I guess you can see that would be happening in other places. And I want to just lay in one more little comment here, which is, I think part of the problem that, particularly in our Western culture, why this is so offensive to us is because of our Victorian background, and because all we can do is associate it with the intimacy. And we tend to wrap the whole idea up in the idea of intimacy. And in that, it causes that that stir of emotions of unfaithfulness and all those kinds of things. And I think in these situations, we don't recognize that many, many times this was a spiritual covenant to a large degree. And that's
Absolutely.
so that's what we trip over all the time.
It is because we automatically, naturally just assume that there was physical intimacy. Oh, well, if they were married, then there had to have been that. Well, not always.
Well,
definitely not. If you look at the range of Joseph Smith's wives, people talk about him marrying some younger ones, and we'll get to that a little later. Well, he also married some who were well past childbearing age, and he was sealed to them, but there is absolutely no evidence of any intimacy of any type, nor was it even expected that there would be.
Well, and that's why the polyandrous marriage were toward the beginning, is because then it wasn't a threat to Emma. That wasn't the kind of marriage it was.
Exactly.
It was a stealing in eternity.
Right.
Exactly. Absolutely. So this is a good segue to, I want to kind of, talk about the reaction of the saints when the time came that he began to carefully expand the circle, shall we say, of those who knew about plural marriage and then began practicing plural marriage. The reactions, as expected, were they ranged from shock to disbelief to anger, even in hearing about something that was so foreign to their sensibilities. And I have a couple of quotes that I want to give. So first, I am going to mention about Brigham Young because, and most people have heard about this, but it's a good way to kind of explain that. Yeah, a lot of people think, well, of course, the men liked the idea of having a number of wives because they immediately jump to
Intimacy.
yeah, exactly. But Brigham Young's first reaction was, he later told that as he left, where Joseph had told him about it, that he was walking along trying to come to terms with that, and he saw a funeral cortege, and he said for the first time in his life, he envied the corpse that was in the casket because he was so appalled at the idea of taking more than one wife. And of course, people talk about, well, the women, obviously, their reaction must have been, horrified, etc. And yes, some were, but let me give you a couple of examples here. So Vilate Kimball, the wife of Heber C. Kimball, when Heber C. Kimball learned about plural marriage and all that was to be involved, it troubled him so much that his countenance was different. He was carrying a heavy burden. She and their children could tell that there was something just really difficult weighing on Heber C. Kimball's mind, and he wouldn't say what it was. They tried to get it out of him. What's bothering you so much? And he wouldn't tell till finally Vilate went to the Lord. She prayed and she basically said, please let me know what is bothering him so much. And she received basically a vision talking about the plurality of wives, and it was opened up to her. And here's just a portion of that quote that Helen Mar Kimball, her daughter, later wrote down. The vision of her mind was open, and she saw the principle of celestial marriage illustrated in all its beauty and glory, together with the great exaltation and honor it would confer upon her in that immortal and celestial sphere, if she would but accept it and stand in her place by her husband's side. And so she received, at that time, she received her own testimony, and then she went to Heber C. Kimball and said, I know what's bothering you, blah, 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 and explained and basically gave her permission. Now, Mary Elizabeth Rollins Lightner, as I said, she was Mary Elizabeth Rollins, and she first met Joseph Smith when she was about 12 years old. She met him in Kirtland, and there she had read the Book of Mormon and had been converted that the Book of Mormon truly was a work of God before Joseph ever arrived. She had been converted that the Book of Mormon was the work of God before Joseph ever arrived in Kirtland. And then she met him when she was 12. And later she married Adam Lightner, who, as I mentioned earlier, was not a member of the church, never did join, but was very friendly toward the saints. And so she was already married when Joseph Smith approached her about being sealed to him. And she was shocked. She was offended. She was angry. And basically told Joseph that they shouldn't even be discussing something like that. Joseph explained to her that this really was from God. And I'm going to read a little quote here. I did not believe. If God told him so, why did he not come and tell me? The angel told him I should have a witness. An angel came to me, and it went through me like lightning. I was afraid. Joseph said, and I'm going to wait on that part. So basically, she explained that what had happened, it was at night. She awoke, she sat up in bed, and there was an angel at the end of the bed. And she was so scared that she laid back down and threw the covers over her head. And finally, when she peeked, by that point, if I remember correctly, the angel was gone. But Joseph Smith told her that the angel, that he had come with more revelation and knowledge than Joseph ever dare reveal. And she years later, she commented how disappointed she was that she had been scared because she could have learned so much more if she had just calmly waited for the message.
Not hid under the covers.
Right, exactly. And then there's the quote by Elizabeth Ann Whitney, who was the wife of Newell K. Whitney. She said, "We were seemingly rapt because they had talked about it together and had prayed together. We were seemingly wrapped in a heavenly vision. A halo of light encircled us, and we were convinced in our own minds that God heard and approved our prayers. Our hearts were comforted, and our faith made so perfect that we were willing to give our eldest daughter, Sarah Ann Whitney, then only 17 years of age, to Joseph in the holy order of plural marriage, laying aside all our traditions and former notions in regard to marriage. We gave her with our mutual consent." And so those are just some examples from some of the women who were involved very early on.
Now, Craig, as I've studied these topics, I seem to, most people seem to have an adverse reaction at first.
Yes.
And I think I could categorize the others that come around in kind of two categories. One is the ones that have a divine affirmation. And then the other one is, I think, testimonies of women that have lived this for a long period of time and have kind of come past the struggles that they went through and everything, and have come to find that it's incredible, and has been such a blessing in their lives. So
Explain why you say that.
well, I think George Buchanan's wives and everything, published in the newspapers and everything, that this is the most freeing and beautiful system.
Well, and I would use Helen Mar Kimball as an example. She, and I might add, everyone talks about Joseph Smith going after this young girl, blah, blah, blah. What many people don't realize is that it was after Vilate had received her testimony and Heber C. Kimball had his testimony, it was Heber C. Kimball who offered his daughter to marry Joseph. I'll explain in a little bit more detail a little bit later, but I'm going to explain now. You take a look at the marriages of Joseph Smith and who did he marry? For the most part, the women that he married were connected in one way or another, either daughters or sisters of the men that he had around him, close and loved.
And loved him.
And loved him. So you have two daughters of Edward Partridge. You have a sister of Brigham Young. You have a sister of Benjamin F. Johnson. You have a daughter of Heber C. Kimball.
And a sister of Erastus and Lorenzo Snow. Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
A sister of Lorenzo Snow.
Oh, that's right.
Erastus was a cousin.
Cousin, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to say, and in that situation, being a father, you're very protective of your daughters. And so if they thought that there was any hanky-panky, so to speak,
Right.
going on, they would not have agreed to such a thing
Right.
at all.
Wait a minute. Benjamin F. Johnson.
Oh,
You got to tell that story.
okay. I will tell that story. I'm going to mention really quickly another great example is Newell K. Whitney and Elizabeth Ann Whitney, who agreed to have their daughter marry. And so these were two others who loved Joseph Smith, and he loved them. And Joseph loved Benjamin F. Johnson.
And
So
just real quick before you tell the story, I think we need to realize this wasn't just a sealing between Joseph Smith. The way they looked at it was this was a sealing of their whole families
Exactly.
together, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Through Joseph Smith.
Yeah, through this marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go into a little more detail on that a little bit later from an essay that I wrote for the Persistence of Polygamy, where it was my take on section 132.
But don't forget Benjamin F. Johnson.
I'm going to mention that right now. So he explained to Benjamin F. Johnson, his sister, and I should have looked up her name to remember for sure. His sister was widowed and was living with Benjamin F. Johnson and his family. And Joseph Smith, because she was living in Benjamin F. Johnson's household. He approached Johnson and explained about plural marriage and that he wanted to take his sister as a plural wife. And Johnson, after some thought about it and everything, he gave his permission, and he said, "I'll allow that." And he said, "But," and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something along the line of, "If I ever find out that you did this to dishonor my sister, I'll kill you." And Joseph Smith, in so many words, basically said, "I wouldn't blame you for killing me." Yep. So it was an interesting experience at that time when they were still trying to keep it very quiet, because they knew that it would be the cause of even more persecution than they already were experiencing. But, let's talk about Emma for a minute or so. Now, Emma Smith, as we are well aware, the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, when it was finally written down, it was because Joseph and Emma, they had gone the rounds on this for quite a while. This wasn't, section 132 wasn't a surprise for Emma.
Exactly. We've already talked 1830, 1831.
Exactly.
But not the right time yet,
Right. And so it was a great trial for Emma. So when section 132 was written down, it was written down mostly for Emma. And in fact, Joseph F. Smith later explained that this revelation, that if it had been written for public consumption, it would have been written differently than it was. That this was written for Emma. And Joseph Smith had planned at a later point to have a more extensive revelation explaining everything behind it and why it had to be revealed, and as part of the restoration of all things and the significance of it. But he didn't, and so eventually they just used this because they had copies of it, and at least it was official in terms that it was from Joseph. It was his words inspired by God. And so we know that now, and Joseph F. Smith had explained that. But Emma went through, it was a very painful experience for her, and quite frankly, my heart goes out to Emma. Do I think that she handled it well? No, I do not. But did Joseph Smith handle it well? No.
Especially in the beginning.
It's just like the revelation didn't come with an instruction how-to manual.
Exactly. And it shows the humanness of both of them, the humanity, you could say. They were both human. They had emotions. They had good points, bad points. They were doing their best to understand and even to live it. Emma tried. She really did try. And
well, didn't she actually allow Joseph and select a couple of the wives?
She two of the first that she selected were Emily Partridge and her sister Maria Eliza Partridge, who were living in the household. By this point, Edward Partridge had died. They had gone to live in the household to try to take some of the burden off of the Partridge family. And so they were basically acting as servants to help Emma around the house.
In the mansion house,
right? In the mansion house. Homestead first, then mansion house. But after she had given her permission, from that point on, she changed her mind very quickly, and she wanted both of the girls out of the house, and she wanted them out of Nauvoo. And they said that they would honor her feelings and leave the house, but they were not going to leave Nauvoo. And so they went to live with different families. And years later, Emily Partridge commented, she wrote, "After these many years, I can truly say, poor Emma, she could not stand polygamy, but she was a good woman, and I never wished to stand in her way of happiness and exaltation. I hope the Lord will be merciful to her. and I believe he will. Perhaps she has done no worse than any of us would have done in her place. Let the Lord be the judge. And she also commented, I do not know as anybody would have done any better than Emma did under the circumstances.
Well, you said that your heart goes out to Emma, and mine too, actually. But actually the one that I think would have been, I mean, you think about the first person trying to live plural marriage in the 19th century, and with like a sum total of a zero support group,
Right?
friends and everything that Fanny Alger went through, and them trying to kidnap her and charge her with, I, my heart goes out to Fanny or Frances. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Mine too. And the situation was just a mess. The rumors started flying. It went exactly as Joseph did not want
Was
to,
afraid.
was afraid that it would go. And
Sometimes we have those self-fulfilling prophecies, right?
exactly. So it was to the point that Fanny eventually left Kirtland and if I remember correctly, ended up in Indiana.
Didn't Levi Hancock actually have to whisk her out of town
Yes.
secretly by
Yes.
horseback? Yeah.
Yes,
To join her family. Joseph said, bring her to her family. This is
yes. And now Fanny, she had good feelings toward Joseph and the church, and we have reference to her visiting Nauvoo, but by that point she had remarried. She was married for a time at least. Custer, I can't think of his first name, but he was a non-Mormon,
right.
if I remember correctly.
And from what I understand, they had a very happy marriage and a
Yes.
lot of children.
Yes,
But they always had good feelings toward Joseph.
yes,
And I don't think that she was sealed to him in the Nauvoo temple there's no record of that.
I don't think so. Right.
But I think you made a point when we were talking before that the sealing that would have been performed in Kirtland would have been considered valid at that time anyway.
Yes, yes. Well, certainly it would have been, or Joseph wouldn't have done it.
Right. But there's no record of it.
Right. There isn't. Right. Okay. So we have these examples of people and how they reacted to plural marriage, but let's get into Doctrine and Covenants 132 now. And the promises, it's really a very deep and complicated revelation. If you really think about it, there are so many levels to this revelation. I have been aware of some people have said, well, we don't do polygamy in the church anymore. Let's just get rid of section 132. No, you can't do that. Anyone suggesting that does not have an understanding of the doctrinal significance.
Well, the whole sealing of families
Exactly.
for eternity, right?
Exactly, that's in there. Just a really quick description. So we know that it is the revelation relating to the new and everlasting covenant, including the eternity of the marriage covenant and the principle of plural marriage. And then, as explaining what is in it, we have exaltation is gained through the new and everlasting covenant. The terms and conditions of that covenant are set forth. Celestial marriage and a continuation of the family unit enable men to become gods. The straight and narrow way leads to eternal lives. The laws given relative to the blasphemy against the Holy Ghost, promises of eternal increase and exaltation are made to prophets and saints in all ages. And then it goes through speaking more directly to Joseph and the sealing keys. And then it has the laws governing plural marriage are set forth. And I want to read just verse 19 and 20 really quickly, because the promises made here are just really beautiful. And again, verily I say unto you, if a man marry a wife by my word, which is my law, and by the new and everlasting covenant, and it is sealed unto them by the Holy Spirit of promise, by him who is anointed, unto whom I have appointed this power and the keys of this priesthood. And it shall be said unto them, ye shall come forth in the first resurrection. And if it be after the first resurrection, in the next resurrection, and shall inherit thrones, kingdoms, principalities, and powers, dominions, all heights and depths. Then shall it be written in the Lamb's book of life that he shall commit no murder, whereby to shed innocent blood. And if ye abide my covenant, and commit no murder, whereby to shed innocent blood, it shall be done unto them in all things whatsoever my servant hath put upon them in time and through all eternity, and shall be of full force when they are out of the world, and when they shall pass by the angels and the gods which are set there, to their exaltation and glory in all things, as hath been sealed upon their heads, which glory shall be a fullness and a continuation of the seeds forever and ever. Then shall they be gods, because they have no end. Therefore shall they be from everlasting to everlasting, because they continue. Then shall they be above all, because all things are subject unto them. Then shall they be gods, because they have all power, and the angels are subject unto them. I mean, that's just incredible.
Yeah, this is the introduction to the King Follett Discourse.
I was going to say also myself is, I mean, in that sense of the word, that is, I mean, I don't know how to pronounce it, say it any different than it comes to mind, and that is the principles of Mormondom directly in a nutshell. That we are children of God working towards being like Him.
Exactly.
Literally taking the words in the Sermon on the Mount, literally, come follow me.
Exactly. That's beautiful. Yeah. That's cannot be expressed any better. That's exactly. That's what it is all about. And
I was just going to say too, I think that we also need to keep it in perspective. Sometimes, we're defending the restoration of plural marriage and like this is a Mormon doctrine. And the reality is this is not a Mormon doctrine. This is biblical. Right. This is, we need to have our Christian brothers out there saying, well, this is why God allowed Abraham and Jacob, I mean, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, the people from whom we get our scriptures are the ones, and these, just like the early brethren in the church, I believe these were men of the highest moral character.
Absolutely.
That's why they struggled so hard.
I think the reason this is so hard in our Western Victorian culture comes from actually Rome more than anything. I mean, Roman antics. We've created a whole idea of what marriage is supposed to look like based on whether it's romantic or not. Yeah. And that sometimes, well, in our modern world, it's almost the death of marriage, because if people don't get their romantics, they think, oh, I'm out of love, it's time to split and go find somebody else. It's this Roman antics that causes false pretenses of what we think it ought to look like.
And it's not that love and affection isn't part of the marriage, it's that the idea was more based in covenant.
Yes.
More based in
Absolutely.
Responsibility and commitment.
Absolutely.
And team.
Right. And that love was a natural byproduct of that desire to keep covenant.
Well, and actually the concept of romantic love, of marriage based on romantic love, actually at the time of Joseph Smith, that concept was in its early days. It didn't really, that was not a prime moving reason for marriage earlier than that. There were other reasons for marriage, and then romance would come along with it. Romantic love would come along with it after being married for a time. But for being the all-purpose reason for marrying, that was a fairly new concept, really, at the time of Joseph Smith. For those who have studied marriage patterns and culture and all of that, that was kind of just being introduced Think along the lines of Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen.
Jane Austen.
Jane Austen wrote kind of on that idea, and she was one of the first actually to write about marriage that was based primarily on love and romance. That was a new concept, so yeah, that was something that really wasn't being considered that much.
Right.
There's more to it, and one of which is family, and the
I would say the most important is
most
family.
important thing, and so that's kind of a segue into. I wanted to mention my essay that I had in the book was titled "Doctrine and Covenants," section 132, and Joseph Smith's expanding concept of family. And obviously, I'm not going to read the whole essay. I'm sure you and anyone that is going to be listening to this will appreciate that I'm not going to read the whole essay, but I want to
Tell us the name of the essay so those of us that do want to can go back and
so again, it's from The Persistence of Polygamy, the first volume, dealing with Joseph Smith, and the essay is titled Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, and Joseph Smith's expanding concept of family.
Yep.
And I start out with this where I write the powerful, almost haunting words of the old folk song, "Will the circle be unbroken?" express the intense longing to be reunited in the presence of God with deceased loved ones in the hereafter. The lyrics go, "Will the circle be unbroken? By and by, Lord, by and by. Will the circle, there's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky." And then it continues on. But the early saints of the Restoration had the same yearning to return to God and continue married and familial bonds beyond death. And then at the very end, I write eternal marriage. And what I did was I talked about the fact that I view 132 in a way to be the culmination of Joseph's expanding understanding based on the revelations that he was receiving, his expanding understanding of the eternal family and how marriage and family was all tied together. And so at the very end, I write, eternal marriage binds ancestry to posterity. As Robert Millet explained, Doctrine and Covenants 132 made it clear that salvation consists in the blessing of eternal lives, the continuation of the family unit in eternity. This could only be accomplished by performing the saving ordinances and sealing one to another. According to Richard L. Bushman, nothing in his later life, excited Joseph Smith more than the idea of joining together the generations of humanity from start to finish. The human yearning for the circle to truly be unbroken pushed the early saints to seek out how they could be together with loved ones forever. Joseph Smith's expanding theology regarding salvation and the eternal family allowed Latter-day Saints to believe family relationships did not stop with mortality, nor with the traditional nuclear family. The concept of family extended to more distant relations, as well as went beyond the grave and became multi-generational. This was eventually accentuated even further by the numerous and intricate family relationships created through plural marriage, which in many ways supplanted for the saints the earlier nuclear family model with a religious or spiritual variation of the larger family model, emphasizing intra and intergenerational connections. The doctrines and ordinances of sealings, baptisms for the dead, and other temple ordinances focused on eternal relationships and redefined the parameters of the family. All of this culminated with Doctrine and Covenants 132 and the path to exaltation through the new and everlasting covenant of marriage.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I'd like to go back to the verse that you were reading in 132. You read verses 19 and 20.
Mhm.
And I want to talk about the part that you said that you read that they shall come forth in the first resurrection, and if it be after the first resurrection, in the next resurrection. I just want us not to read over top of that line, because I think sometimes, at least I know I did, I was like, temple marriage, going to, the sealing forever thing, and we don't realize all the work and the struggle and the everything that goes in between that.
Right.
And we kind of look at it as like those sealing keys are the super sticky glue, and there's things that we do aren't going to change it. And we even read that verse like, wow, check it out, we can do anything, and we'll still come forth in the first resurrection or the next resurrection. I just want to remind everybody that the first resurrection, if you look at its definition in Revelation 20, is the one before the millennium starts.
Or right at
The next
Right.
one
Yeah.
is at the end of the millennium, and there's 1,000 years of hell
Yeah.
in between those two.
Well, hopefully for some, not for everybody.
An unhappy time out period.
Well, but when he says that they will come forth in the first resurrection or the next
Second.
resurrection, the one after that. And so I'm like, I think that just, as a word of caution, and I know I understand why all the emphasis is on the sealing keys and the necessity of a marriage that's going to be for eternity. But I hope that we understand that for an eternity, we're going to be working together on being happy in that marriage and what that looks like.
Well, I was going to say, truthfully, and I've felt this for a lot of years, what really the sealing keys is when God puts his stamp of approval on the union.
Ultimately, yes.
But the truth of it is, what really seals a marriage beyond permission from the Lord, it's kind of like many are called, few are chosen, although you might be ordained to that, maybe so, and I'm quoting 121 here. What really holds it together is true love. When a man and a woman truly choose every day that they want to do it together.
Mhm.
And then the Lord can put his approval on it, and that's the sealing. But in essence, we choose eternity every day.
Right. Right. And I love that because God will not force any man to heaven, and God will not force any marriage that they don't choose
It's unhappy.
eternally. Yeah.
I absolutely believe that.
In fact, I'm going to mention that in a moment. I know that we've been going for a while.
But we could go all day. Keep going.
So let me lead to just a short discussion. This is pretty much toward the end here. A short discussion. I realize there are a lot of members of the church who in one way or another are uncomfortable with or have problems with Joseph Smith, plural marriage, etc. And so I have listed a few here that I just want to cover pretty quickly.
Oh, look, before you go
Yeah,
there,
okay.
let me just clarify what I just said earlier so you get it really clear. You will never be forced or never be required to do more than you choose to.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that is one of the points that I'm going to mention. But the first one, we have what we, for lack of a better way of putting it, polygamy deniers who say that Joseph Smith didn't teach plural marriage. The reality is there are contemporary sources that mention William Law, who of course later became an enemy of Joseph. While he was still a counselor in the first presidency, he recorded in his diary how he pled with Joseph to stop teaching and practicing plural marriage. And so we have his diary entries. When the Nauvoo Expositor was published, it basically hinted at some of the plural wives.
What wasn't one like, for the Partridge Sisters,
Yes.
partridge in a tree?
It was mentioning partridges in a
Yeah.
tree, something along that line.
Yeah.
I remember that because the Partridge sisters are a couple of my favorites for doing research.
Well, and stellar women.
Yes, absolutely. But there's also something else that has just come out just a couple of weeks ago. There is an article that is available. All you have to do is go to Interpreter, and you can like Google Interpreter LDS or Interpreter Journal, and then go to the journal and find the article. It's by Paul Fields, Stephen T. Densley Jr., Matthew Roper, and Larry Bassist. It's, quote, historical and stylometric evidence for the authorship of Doctrine and Covenants 132, unquote. And it's an Interpreter, a journal of Latter-day Saint faith and scholarship. And it shows scientifically that 132 is it's the words of Joseph Smith. They compared it to Brigham Young, compared it to William Clayton, etc.
I actually saw that on a video just
Yeah.
recently. Somebody did.
Yes, and it's wonderful. Long article, but well worth the read. Okay, so next, polyandry, and we've discussed this already. That this was kind of Joseph's attempt to live plural marriage, but not really live plural marriage until he was finally told, yeah,
Spiritually live it without
right, exactly.
applying it into this world.
Yes, and was finally told, yeah, this isn't working. You're not fooling God. So then it had to move beyond that. But both Fair and Joseph Smith's Polygamy, the website, address this issue really well. Now, another is teenage wives, underage marriages. So, first of all, they were not underage marriages when Joseph married even Helen Mar Kimball, who was 14 at the time. They were not underage marriages. In fact, far from it. Little people nowadays, they suffer from what they call presentism. We have what is we consider the appropriate age for marriage, and anything under that we look at askance. This was a different time. We cannot project our own values and world experiences onto people of another time. That's presentism. And back then, age 14 was not illegal.
Or even uncommon.
Or even uncommon. Most people don't realize that most of the states at that time, the legal marriage age for boys, for men, was 14. The legal marriage age for girls was 12.
Okay,
Well,
we're all going, what?
Yes.
Yeah. But I think you got to take that in context there with what the time of Christ. And the average age at the time of Christ was early 30s.
For death.
For death, because of not having modern medicine. And one of the most common, we found this when we were in Israel the first time, one of the most common things that Joseph Ganat, our tour guide at the time, told us, the reason for many of these people to die at such a young age was tooth infection, mouth problems. And
Not only that, but for women, and this one blew me away. For women, it was broken bones in your forearms here. And that's because every day they use grinding stones to grind their flour. And if your arms broke, you couldn't feed your family. I mean, that just blew my mind.
well, and in those situations, when we thought about that, it was almost a necessity for them to marry young, or the race would have died off
Yes.
because their life expectancy was so short.
Right.
Right.
Well, and so those are good points, and that is why we had age 12 and age 14. Over here, it was based on English common law, and English common law had it at 12 and 14. And that's because English common law was based on canon law, the law of the church, which was the Catholic Church, which, I might add, canon law was based on Roman law.
That's-
And Roman law was age 12 for female, 14 for a male. And that goes back to that time.
Yes, it goes right there.
Talking to me.
Yeah, it's still a little bit, oh, wow.
Yeah.
But you
Because-
do understand in that culture, it was nigh unto necessity to
Right.
keep their culture alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I went to a class recently, and one of the points that he made is that every age believes that they are the most enlightened age that has ever existed.
And we're no different.
And we will someday have people looking at our day and age going, what a bunch of backward people.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it.
Yeah, I'm sure too.
So I've actually done a fair amount of research on marrying in the teens. And in the book that I keep referencing, I co-authored an essay, The Age of Joseph Smith's Wives in Social and Demographic Context, again, in the Persistence of Polygamy. I co-authored that with David Keller and Gregory L. Smith. Later, I authored an article for Interpreter. So if you go to Interpreter for the one article, you can look for this one too. And this was in 2019, and the title was Assessing the Criticisms of Early Age Latter-day Saint Marriages. And in that, I used all of my examples were non-Mormons because, yeah, I've heard people say, well, it's you Mormons. You marry the young girls because you're pedophiles. Well, first of all, the people who say that need to learn what the actual definition of pedophilia is, because none of Joseph's marriages or any of those others even fit within the definition. But beyond that, this was, as you mentioned, Farrell, it says, while certainly not dominant, early marriage age was also not uncommon and was socially acceptable in the past. In other words, people in the past had a different understanding and definition of childhood, adolescence, and appropriate age to marry than what is accepted or even expected nowadays. And I'm not going to bore you with all of this, but the key to understanding why early marriage age might exist in one place and at one point of time and not in another, that's the key right there. Time and place. It all depends on time and place and the things that allowed early age marriage. And it would involve, as I said, time and place, economics, demographics, and culture. And so you have some places where at one point early marriage age was acceptable, even expected, and then later not. I'm going to give an example from a couple of my own ancestors. And this is in Quebec, Canada. The first and second generations in Quebec of French settlers into that part of Canada, there were very, very few women. In fact, there were so few women that they had what they called les filles de roi, the king's daughters, where they basically said to these women, I might add, ages 14 to 28, 30, 14 to 30, with most of them being actually in the teens and early 20s. They basically said, we will give you a dowry, we will pay you and give you a dowry if you go to Quebec and marry, and we will pay you for each child that is born for X amount of years. And so these women went because they knew they were on the poorer side, and I descend from two of them, so you can see where my family was in the French society. But they were on the poorer side, and they knew we don't have any chance here, but we do over there. And they went. And so the marriage age was really quite young because there were so few women. Now in the next generation, and this is these examples I'm going to give are from the next generation. And so in Quebec, 13-year-old Marie-Magdalene Robin-Guillaume married François Bélanger, who was age 25. Those are two of my ancestors. And another 13-year-old ancestor of mine was Marie Martin, who married Jean Cloutier, who was 28. And but by the third and definitely by the fourth generation, marriage age had gone up to, the average was around 19 to 21.
That's the same as it was in the 1800s. Yeah.
I was going to say, probably the single most example we have, at least by everything we know, is that Mary, who was the mother of Jesus, was an early teen marriage.
Right.
And she bore Christ at a very young age. In fact, some of your anti-Christians use that to say that was pedophilia.
Yeah,
you know, they want to say that Christians are pedophilia because of the connection that they can pretty well narrow down that Mary was in her early teens.
Right. Yeah.
And so they want to use that against Christianity.
Because they're projecting their own views, then they're showing their ignorance, basically. And people who say, oh, Joseph marrying those early teens, pedophilia, no, absolutely not. And Nauvoo was on the edge of the frontier. And so they were marrying at younger ages there. Now,
very responsible world, because you had to get
yes,
out and make it happen to survive.
They were adults.
Yeah, you had to survive.
Now, another thing that I wanted to mention is the angst over potential plurality of wives in the hereafter. I have read emails and heard comments of women in the church saying, you know, they're just dreading, they're really, you know, their emotions are tied up because of this fear that they're going to have to live a plural marriage in the hereafter. And I want to give a quote from Elder Jack H. Gosselin, who was of the First Quorum of the 70. This was back in 1986. So those of you who are listening, if the name doesn't sound that familiar, it's because he was some time back. But his words are still really good. This is from April 1986 General Conference. Quote, "The Book of Mormon makes it clear that happiness is our destiny. It speaks of dwelling with God in a state of never-ending happiness," from Messiah 2, chapter 2, verse 41. "It is also made clear that all things shall be restored to their proper order, everything to its natural frame, raised to endless happiness to inherit the kingdom of God, or to endless misery to inherit the kingdom of the devil. We also learn that we are raised to happiness according to our desires of happiness." And that's from Alma 41, verses 4 to 5. Heavenly Father loves us. He wants us to be happy. He's not going to force anyone to do something that's going to make them eternally unhappy. And so I think what we need to do, and I realize it's easy for me as a man to say that, but even my wife is constantly saying, stop worrying about the other side. Let's just worry about here.
Well, I think it was even that was understood even back in the 1880s when you had all that huge pressure on the church. John Taylor received a revelation that said, "It is more pleasing to me that people exercise their free agency in regard to these things." So,
Right.
you know, this idea that there's ever force involved, I don't think it holds up historically.
Exactly. That's
Well, it's definitely not
Yeah.
God's plan.
Yeah.
That's the best said.
Yeah. All right. So I'm almost done. Finally, sorry.
Oh, we've loved it. Thank you so much.
So I just want to, for those listening, here are some sources that discuss the beginning of plural marriage and all that was involved. You have the Gospel Topics Essays. So just go to churchofjesuschrist.org and either type in Gospel Topics Essays or look for it. And then under plural marriage, it talks about plural marriage in the church, then plural marriage specifically in Kirtland and Nauvoo, plural marriage in families in early Utah, the manifesto, and the end of plural marriage. Also, FAIR, the Foundation for Apologetic Information and Research, or whatever they're calling it now, is just type in FAIR LDS, and then they have a whole section on plural marriage, lots of information, an incredible amount of information. Then there's the book that Newell and I co-edited, The Persistence of Polygamy, Joseph Smith and the Origins of Mormon Polygamy. That costs. The others don't, so keep that in mind. And then Joseph Smith's Polygamy, which is a website. So I encourage you, don't stress, learn. And I think that as you prayerfully learn, go back to what was said, when in introducing section 132, when it encouraged to prepare thy heart to receive. Do this prayerfully, and I think you will have your own assurance that this was inspired by God. It is of God. And I bear my testimony that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God and that he received this by revelation. I have no doubt whatsoever. So,
And with that, we're just really grateful for you agreeing to come on with us.
So we felt like
Well,
this was such a delicate topic. We needed an expert to be able
Yes.
to come in and work with us.
For us, it not only is it a joy to have your expertise, but also it's a joy to just call you friend. And with that, thank you. Until next
I
time.
will look forward to the declarations and manifestos and the next lessons.
God bless.
So let us remember the prophets who came with visions of hope. They called out our names. In gatherings of hearts, we find our way home. United in purpose, we're never alone. As the sun sets low, painting skies of gold, we carry their messages, their tales to be told. In the warmth of communion, we find our way free. The legacy of faith, in joy and in pain. Oh, doctrine and covenants, words written in grace, revealing a journey leading us to a sacred place. With every verse sung, we feel the peace descend. In the whispers of the past, our spirits mend. So here's to the journey, to paths yet unknown. With faith as our compass, we'll never be alone. In the echoes of history, a love that is true. In doctrine and covenants, our hearts will renew.